But to begin with, let's start with this. When most people think about human trafficking, that's what they think about, forced prostitution, for good reason. My first exposure to this was 25 years ago. I was a public health officer living and working in Nepal. My job was to treat people who had diseases. At that time, we were finding girls that were 12, 13 years old who were HIV positive. Couldn't understand what was going on. Very conservative culture. We should not have had that type of disease among that age group, so we went to go and talk to them. And what we heard was the same story over and over again. And it went something like this. Human trafficker, usually guy, 20, 21 years old, would go into the village and he would ask around saying, I'm looking for a wife. I don't want an urban wife. They're too difficult. I want a village wife. He'd flash a bunch of money around to make people think he was rich. Eventually, he'd find a girl, 12, 13 years old. That's around the age they marry. Befriend her, and then go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. Family's thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity. He's going to take care of our daughter. He's going to take care of us. Life is going to be good. 2 days later, they actually go through the wedding ceremony. The entire community's there. Everybody's thrilled. After that, he says, okay, well, I'm going to take your daughter to Kathmandu, but guess what? I'll be back again in 3 months. But that isn't what is going to happen. Instead of taking her to Kathmandu, he takes her to Mumbai, India. Now, this girl's never been more than 20 kilometers away. She thinks she's still in Nepal when she's in India. He takes her to the red light district. He puts her in a room and he says, honey, stay here. I'll be back in a few minutes. She was looking around as she was coming in. She saw these women standing in the street. She didn't know what was going on. She said, no, don't leave me. He says, it's going to be okay. He then goes to the madam, gets the $600 US for having sold her to the brothel. He gets the gold from the wedding, and he hands over the wedding pictures. After that, he returns to Nepal to do it again and again, maybe 80 or 90 times in a year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with between 10 and 15 men a day, every day, because I say so. Her initial response is shock. My husband wouldn't do that. He loves me. That's what happened. When she finally comes to the point where she internalizes what's going on, she says, I'll kill myself before I do those shameful things. The madam then takes out the photographs and says, is this your mom? Is this your dad? Is this your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. To make her into a prostitute is quite simple. You bring in 3 professional rapists, and over a 2-day period, you rape her 40, 50 times, till eventually she just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. If she's lucky, after 2 years, she makes it back to Nepal. Many of them don't. Why 2 years? Because at the end of the 2-year period, spiritually, emotionally, physically, there's nothing left. Nobody wants her anymore, so they get thrown out. Now, as a public health officer, I was hearing this story over and over again. But it wasn't until I actually went to those brothels that I understood the sheer evil of this. I was invited by the Indian government to do public health checks. My job was to go in and make sure they were using condoms. I had a police officer with me. I went into one of the brothels, and there was an 11-year-old trafficking victim. She saw this Caucasian guy, saw an opportunity, literally ran up and wrapped herself around me and said, save me, they're doing terrible things to me. I looked down at this child who was hysterically crying, reaching out for this help. She was wearing a dress 10 sizes too big because she was a kid in an adult world. Turned to the police officer and said, okay, I'm going to take her out. I said, I can't do that. So what are you talking about? You're a police officer. Says, where we are now, if we try to leave, they'll kill us. So to make a long story short, we left. We came back with a lot more police, but as you can imagine, she was gone. I tell this story because I wasn't one of those people when I was 15 years old that said, when I grow up, I want to be an activist. In fact, I did everything I could to avoid it. But every time I turned around, I kept being faced with this terrible thing of human trafficking. Eventually did what a lot of activists do, just surrendered to it, and 25 years later, here I am talking to you. But I'm going to tell you one more story. So years ago when I was living and working in Nepal, once again, every time I heard one of these stories, I just felt like, wow, this is really terrible. What can I do to help? So finally I decided that I was going to write a book. So as part of this book project, I would go from shelter to shelter and interview the women and the girls who had been forced into prostitution. I went to one shelter and there was a girl named Gita. Every time I went up to her, she said, no, I don't want to talk to you. But as I interviewed everyone else, she sat and listened to everything that was being said. So I finished there, and I was about to leave, and Gita comes up to me and says, okay, you can have my story. I was thrilled. So Gita sat on one side of the table, the rest of us were on the other side of the table. In over a 3-hour period, she told the worst story I had ever heard of rape and torture and betrayal and murder and disease, everything you could imagine. Honestly, I didn't know what to say. I was shocked. So, not knowing what to say, I finally turned to her and I said, wow, you must be so angry at those traffickers for what they did to you. She paused and said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She kept saying, where were you? So that every day she woke up kind of praying for somebody to come and help. Nobody came. Said she went to school till she was 12. She knew that everything around her was illegal, it was slavery, it was wrong. Nobody came. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. She said the traffickers are just bad people being bad people. She said she was angry at the good people, at society for not caring enough to step up and do anything. She kept asking me, why are you here? Why aren't you down there helping those poor girls? And I tell the story because it points out a very important kind of element of this. 10,000 NGO-type people aren't going to be able to make more than a difference of 0.2%. We've demonstrated that for the last couple of years. What we really need is for the world to step up, to understand the issue and play a part.